and got back to the fraternity house, and it was kind of like everybody was on September the 11th. It was just unreal. It was hard to believe, and it was just...
What, everybody's listening to the radio?
Oh yeah, there was no such thing as TV, and everybody listened to the radio. So it was very quiet, very subdued around him. And the phone rang, and it was for me, and it was Dad. He said, I know you well enough to know that you got a lot of thinking going on right now. Just remember this, whatever you decide you're gonna do will be okay as far as we're concerned. We said we'd rather you stayed in school, of course. Don't do anything rash. Think about it. Do what you have to do. So, okay. So the next day I hitchhiked to St. Louis. That was Monday. The next day was Tuesday. I went downtown to the Federal Building and enlisted in the Naval Air Corps. And they said, well, we want you to go back. And he says, can you get any other guys out of school up there that want to do something fun? Well, I said, well, I could talk to them about it. As it turned out, to make a long story short, 8 of us went into the Naval Air Corps. 5 of us from our fraternity. 2 of whom were killed.
What were all their names?
Jim Iskey was this so close friend of mine whose silver dollar I have, the guy that got killed. Larry Buckley, Joe Wisher, and Scotty Doyle, and myself were the 5. And I was the only one of, and then there were 3 other guys, 2 betas and a Sigma Chi, strangely enough, who were good friends of ours. We all went in together. And 2 of our 5 were killed. 2 of the other 3 were killed. So, but anyway, I was the only one of the 8 who really wanted to get into the Marine Corps, but I had a strong desire if I were going to do this, to get in the Marine Corps. And one of the reasons was that, to me, it looked like the Marines were going to get the hot jobs. It looked like they were going to be the ones that never did I think at that stage of the game that would turn out to be a naval war with carriers carrying the brunt of everything. Never thought about that. I thought that as we were going through flight training, boy, that's when what little that was happening, the Marines were right in the middle of everything. There wasn't what's going on for a while because we were just taking a butt kicking is all. And well, anyway, went into the service, reported to St. Louis Lambert Field. First day I got into trouble.
What did you do?
I hit a guy, and he had it coming. He stole something from me and lied about it. And he was an upperclassman. That's where my mistake was. Anyway, I got 50 demerits and 50 hours walking off with a rifle. If you think 50 hours isn't a long time, you're mistaken, especially when you get more piled onto that. But anyway, I had told everybody, and they were all counting on me. I said, man, you guys are going to be living it up. It's going to be my hometown. I know everybody out there will get you dates. Everything will be fine. Hell, I never got off the base. My mother and dad used to come out and give me cookies through the fence. That's right. I'd be marching off with a rifle, back and forth, back and forth. And I got so many hours. The officer who was in charge of our class called me in one day and he says, Hitchings, he says, look at all these hours you got. He said, you know, this isn't like liberal arts college. You don't need 120 hours to graduate. But anyway, I walked, and I walked, and I walked, and I walked. And the thing about it is that after a certain amount of demerits, you were out of the Naval Air Corps. It didn't make any difference how good you were, who you were the president's son. If you had X number of demerits out of there, well, I reached the saturation point in a hurry. And I had to be much better than I liked to be. And it was, I couldn't afford any changes. So anyway, we graduated from Lambert Field. Most of us soloed in the standard 8 hops. It was fun. The guys I was with were fun. I probably told you about Iski, fraternity brother of mine, who had one of the most wonderful senses of humor I have ever heard, and he was a strange one. And he came down one day. We were flying these little biplane Stearman yellow perils we talked about, and he came in and landed, and one of the officers got a hold of him and chewed him out for coming too close to the tower. And he said, you shouldn't have even been landing to begin with, he said to Iski. He said, didn't you see him giving you a red light? And Iski said, well, I didn't see a red light. The guy just leaned out and handed me a note. Oh, he was really fun. This guy was. I don't even know if I should bring this up. When we were down at Pensacola, we were walking down the street one day, and we were still cadets, and we passed a little woman's apparel shop. And in the window was the largest brassiere I've ever seen in my life. It was humongous. And Iski says, "Wait just a minute, come with me." We went in, and he said to the lady who ran the place, he said, your exhibit out here, he said, would you mind doing me a favor? And she said, no. He said, if anybody comes in here and buys that, would you give them my card? Oh, man.
We went from St. Louis down to Pensacola.
We went right to Pensacola. And it was, I'll say that, it was tough. It was hard. They were pushing very hard. They really needed pilots in those days. And it was rush, rush, rush. But they were still really hard on you. And strict, and it was interesting. So I went through, and we got through in about almost a half the time it would have taken had we enlisted a year later. So it was really an accelerated and tough program. And when the time came when you could request being commissioned as a Marine instead of a Navy man, why, you had that opportunity. And I might add that, and you were eligible to ask for a transfer if you were in the top 10% of your class. That's...
You were, obviously, but what did you rank first?
No, there was Started off, there were 1,000 cadets in 2 different places. 500 went to Lambert Field, 500 went, I forget where. Anyway, they ended up at Corpus Christi. We ended up at Pensacola. And out of the 1,000, there were 389 finished. The rest either washed out or got killed or something. So there were 389 out of the original 1,000. And your date of rank, where you stood in your class, was determined by the ranking on that graduating class 389. So if they needed X number of, say, captains, they'd take the first lieutenants, and if there was only room for half of the first lieutenants to be advanced, they got it according to where you stood in the graduating class. So
So you were in the top 10%.
was number 3.
Wow.
Oh.
How come the others went ahead of you?
Well, I don't know, but I never forgave them.
I know what you thought of that.
But that was interesting because that included a lot, everything. That included all ground school. That included all your grading on every flight that you made. Everything. All.
You have records, didn't you?
Oh, sure.
Wow.
And
So you were commissioned as a...
second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. And I went from there to Opelika, Florida, which is just south of Miami, and where they had a class in fighter procedure class, getting operational training. And they checked us out on a carrier. That was one of the big things they had to get done in a hurry. And then we got 30 days leave, first one. So, well, it was 6 months. 7 months, I guess. No. And my orders read to report to the Marine Air Squadrons at San Diego. Went to San Diego and sat around and waiting to get some more training. And all of a sudden they took a bunch of us and put us on a plane and flew us to Hawaii. They didn't have time for any more training. They had guys, and it was even worse, guys who were in a little before we. Guy who turned out to be one of my closest friends and commander of our squadron, the second tour out, Slim Irwin, went to Midway on the 2nd of June, 1942. The Japs attacked Midway on the 4th of June, 4th or 5th. And when the Japs attacked, Slim had 8 hours in this fighter plane. Never had fired the guns. That's how prepared we were. 8 hours. That's all, just long enough to learn how to land and take off those darn things. Never fired the guns until that happened. He, among other things, just was the plane was completely shot to pieces. He came back in. He didn't talk about it very much, but he told me later, he said, all I was trying to do is get back on the ground before I got killed. He said, Jesus, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't fly anymore. The plane was shot up. So he said, there was Midway down there, and he said, there's a runway. So he said, I just kept the wheels and flaps where they were, and I landed it in the runway, Said one problem was the Japs were bombing the runway at the time. So he said the thing was scooting along the ground, and he said, I jumped out while the plane was still moving. Said I dove into this big pit. Said it looked like a good foxhole or something. He said the only problem was I looked around and it was full of gasoline and ammunition. But that's how prepared we were in those days. Yep.
So he lived through the Midway.
Oh yes. Yeah, he lived all right.
What were you flying then?
The old Brewster Buffalo,
Brewster Buffalo.
which is F2A. Then when we got to where we were going, we flew the F4F Grumman Wildcat, and later on the Corsair on the second tour. Am I supposed to open this up?
Yeah, an early Christmas.
Ooh boy. Ooh, is that a beauty? Man, oh man. There's a real airplane. Man, that's a beaut. I love that. Well, this we didn't get until our second tour. And when we got this, we were in hog heaven, boy. The only problem was, at that stage of the game, the Marines were messing around with nothing but these little bypassed islands, running milk jobs, milk runs every day, 2 or 3 times a day, losing a lot of pilots, but not accomplishing anything, just keeping them where they were. They were bypassed. You didn't want them to try to build up any Air Force or anything, and it was cruddy duty that time.
Tell us about the first dude.
Well,
Where'd you go from Midway?
I didn't, I wasn't at Midway during the battle. I was just graduated in into June, and anyway, we got out there, ended up at Guadalcanal, and it was a pretty sad situation. We didn't have any aircraft to speak of, didn't have any pilots to speak of. The Japs, you didn't really know at times when you took off who would be holding the airstrip when you got back. Call in to see if the Japs owned it yet. And anyway, by the time I got down there, the first batch of pilots in there had really done well with what they had to play with. And I had some problems. We were taken off one day for the Japanese were reported to be coming down what they called a slot, which was a waterway down the bunch of Solomon Islands. They're bringing, this time they had a couple of cruisers and a whole bunch of destroyers and smaller ships, and they were bringing boatloads of more Japanese infantrymen down there. So we were supposed to bomb them. That's what they started finding out, that these fighter planes were pretty good bombers too. They were swing a couple of 250 pounders or a 500 pounder on the plane. Anyway, there were 9 of us, the only 9 planes available. This great country, this particular day, we had only 9 planes that were flyable. And there were 2 of us divisions, 1 extra guy. And we took off, we started to take off, 8 of them took off. When I started to take off, landing light in the wing of the plane flopped down, and well, you couldn't fly that way because you can't trim your plane up. Well, you can't do any gunnery, anything. Anyway, there I am. Everybody else taking off, and so I sitting there waiting to see what they could do, and the mechs were beside themselves trying to fix this. I said, "Don't fix it, yank it out, get it the hell out of there." And so they pulled it loose, got it out of there, and I took off. And I knew by this time they would be up at 15, 18,000 feet, but I couldn't afford that time lost if I was going to catch them. So I was going pretty much treetop level as far as I could go. And just on the northwest side of Guadalcanal's little mountain range, I went over this. As I crossed over the mountain range, I was able to pick up some radio communication. Though I fiddled around with it, and I found out it was a group of about 200 Marine ground pounders that were trapped by, they never did know, she'd made 2,000 or 3,000 Japanese, and they were trying to get back to their boats and get out of there, and they were in bad shape. And so I contacted a guy down there, and he said, well, we could use any help that we could get. So we were able to talk on that side of the little mountain range. If you got across it, over where the field was, you couldn't even contact them by radio. Anyway, I dropped my bomb. They gave me directions on where would be the most effective place to go. I dropped my bomb, and then I strafed back and forth until I'd used up all my ammunition. And then I said, sit tight, I'll be back as soon as I can get back. And I went back to Henderson Field, called them ahead of time, said I want 250 pounds, I want full ammunition, I want gasoline, get it all ready and when I land. So I landed, they went right to the work, loaded it all up, took off again, went back over and dropped the bombs, strafed as all I could for until I ran out of ammunition. And that's when I got hit in the side. And I don't believe anybody's ever seen it. I never showed it around, but there was a 60 years old now, but got hit right in the side here. It must have been, the bullet must have been just about used up anyway, because it stopped right inside my back here against the steel back of the, where I was leaning back there. It was just, you could feel the bullet back there. And what had happened was it must have been just about spent, because it hit this muscle, and the muscle really was in good shape then. The muscle, it sort of just curved around a little bit and stopped right back there. And so all I was doing was really bleeding. So I went back and I called them again. By this time, some of the other planes were coming back, and we made contact with them, and they still had some ammunition. And they came down and did strafing back and forth. There were 6 of those planes left out of the 8. And ultimately, they got most of those 200 Marines back. Most of them. So, but then I spent the rest of my time there in the hospital, only because the wound was not serious except wouldn't heal. So, and that was, if you ever watched MASH, why, this was much more rustic than MASH. Because it was just make do with what you got there. And everything was, nothing healed in that climate down there. Nothing but bacteria and nothing but the crud would grow in your ears and your feet and your armpits, and it was just awful. And
what island was that?
that was Guadalcanal.
That was Guadalcanal.
Oh.
Well, how long did it take you to recuperate from that?
Well, it took a couple of months, and it was due for a promotion, and you can't get promoted until you can pass a physical. And so I was very anxious to be able to pass a physical. So finally they took me out of there, back to Noumea and back to Hawaii, and came back to the States. And by that time I had some decent help, decent equipment and things that they needed, and it was all right then. So then that's when I met Slim had been at Guadalcanal along with several other friends of mine. So that's when we formed a whole new squadron. Earlier, things were so bad over there, they just took any pilots they could get. No way of figuring things out, regular way. They just, anybody who was available, get them in here, get them in here, get them in here, and get any planes, any pilots you can find. Well, the next time was get to form a squadron from the very beginning. And this guy, Slim, was a marvel at that. How he took, there were probably 50 new Marine pilots assigned to him. And he took about 2 months sorting us, flying with them, doing everything, having us fly with him, everything. And he chose 25 to 30, I forget exactly the number now, guys that he wanted. And I don't believe he missed a bet. Every guy that he took turned out to be solid as a rock. Man, he was good. And it was a marvelous bunch of guys. And we went up to Santa Ana to actually form the base, where it was close to the Muroc Dry Lake, where we could go over and do gunnery work. That's the first time I ran into Lindbergh. We had word. Slim sent a message one day, I forget where I was, but he had me and 3 other guys come in. He said, we got an expert over here in the Corsair, which you guys are going to be flying. And said, why don't you talk to him? Didn't know who it was. Got in there, it was Lindbergh. He was working for Chance Vaught, who made the Corsair at the time. And I want to tell you, that is an experience. You talk about a guy who knew what it was all about. You couldn't ask a question about any sort of aircraft, but especially the Corsair, that he could not answer, and answer intelligently and give you the straight word. He was good. Not only did he talk his good battle, he walked the walk too, because he came out later and flew with us on 3 or 4 missions. And he was superb. I know he was had some problems with this country just before war started. It was only because he was trying to tell this country that they better get off their fannies.
What did they accuse him of at that time?
They thought he was pro-German because he just said, look, here's the greatest Air Force in the world.
Yeah.
And this is the way to fight a war. This is the direction you've got to go. And everybody thought he was pro-German.
I knew it wasn't copy.
He was pro the German Air Corps for sure. But you could sit and talk to him. You could ask him, man, come up with anything. Say, what's the best control settings to fly such and such a speed at such altitude? And he would think, and he'd say, well, I'll tell you, at altitude so-and-so, you lean it back so much, and do this and do that, and it'll give you a constant airspeed of so-and-so. and you could almost go to the bank on it. And he was good, really good. At just before we had our flew the Corsair for the first time, one day at Santa Ana, a P-38 from the Army came over, slowed down, dropped its wheels and flaps, and threw a wrench out that had a note on it tied to it, and it said, "If you've got any fighter pilots down there, send them up." Well, they tell me, and I wish I could have seen this, but there was a fighter pilot who was at Guadalcanal when they hit it the first time, and he was good. He was really good. So he goes up, jumps in the Corsair, takes off, and they tell me he just waxed this P-38. He ran him all over the sky. Just gave him a fit. Came back down, landed, ran over and got a Piper Cub. Fixed a note, threw it over the Army base, flew this little Cub over, dropped it out, said, "If you got any fighter pilots, send them up." Oh, man.
Dad, did that squadron have a name?
That squadron?
Squadron that was formed?
No name. VMF 224. Stands for Heavier Than Air Marine Fighter Squadron. There was a Marine Fighter Squadron 422 who unfortunately became known as the Submarine Squadron because the whole squadron crashed. They ran into terrible, terrible weather. They lost all but one plane and about 6 of the 20-some-odd pilots. Anyway, that was noted in the paper, VMF 422, and my mother saw that, of course, and this was VMF 224 was our squadron. She thought that was it. Then that time, those big trunks that they always gave us, we piled our stuff in and sent it home when you were ready to leave the States. That was another bad thing. Filled all this trunk with all my equipment and all of my stuff that I wasn't going to take with me. Unfortunately, I threw my will on the top, slammed the door, and sent it home with a note on how to open the lock. And of course, my mother opens it up. Here's my will and all this stuff in the trunk.
Oh, man.
Oh.
Was that about the time you established some sort of relationship with the Seagram's company?
Well, it was, yes, because that was just, it was that squadron that availed themselves of Seagram's resources. And it was mainly because of Slim. And now there's a guy who was a salesman. There's a guy who had Kutzmeyer, however the yeah, well, anyway, we were at Santa Ana, and he said, he came over, and he said, "Don't drink anymore. You have to go with me to Los Angeles." So we got a little SNJ, we called it, a little training plane, and took off, went up to Los Angeles, got out. Oh, he said, "Try to look halfway decent." He said, "Don't look like a bum. Shave, have something clean on." Okay. So we flew up to Los Angeles, got out, got a cab, and he won't tell me what he's doing. He says, "Just wait." He says, "Don't be impatient." He said, I want you to know how this is done, though. So we go to the address of Seagram's main offices on the West Coast. There's a big deal. This is a big, important company. And we go in the front door and walk up to the receptionist, and Slim says, "Young lady, who is the boss here? And she said, well, what do you mean? We got so many vice presidents back and forth. He says, well, which one of these vice presidents can fire everybody else? And she says, well, she starts to laugh. She said, well, that should be Mr. So-and-so. He said, would you please tell Mr. So-and-so that Major D.D. Irwin of the United States Marine Corps is here, and I'd like just a few minutes of his time. Boy, she's sort of aghast. I guess this guy was a big shot, all right. Anyway, she gets on the phone, and then she smiles, and then she comes. She said, Mr. So-and-so, we'll see you. Like that didn't happen very often, but he tripped a wire someplace. Anyway, we walk in there. I'm just walking along behind like the pet puppy. I'm doing nothing. And he walked in, Slim put out his hands, and he said, I know how busy you are. There's no question about it. He says, you're probably as busy as I am. And he said, I just happened to be leaving this country with a squadron of Marine fighter planes. And he said, there's just one thing more that I need, almost as much as spare parts of the airplane and ammunition. And this guy hasn't said a word yet. He's sitting there. He says, what's that? And Slim says, I need a source of all the whiskey that a check will buy, and I want you to be able to accept my personal checks. And the guy, he's astounded, and he said, well, Mr. Colonel, Slim says, it's not Colonel, it's not Mr., it's Major. And so he says, how do you expect to get that whiskey where it'll do any good? And Slim says, he says, you know how to run the liquor business, I know how to run the Marine Corps. Well, the guy finally says, Major, if you can accomplish something like that, I will personally endorse anything that you can send in here as far as money is concerned, and we will honor it with all the whiskey it'll buy. You just arrange for the transportation, I will arrange for the whiskey. They shook hands and we left. And as we went along through bad or good times, every once in a while Slim would come around and say, give me $100. Give me $100. Give me $100.
Liquor.
And we wouldn't know what happened, except that somewhere along the line, suddenly there'd be a stir of activity wherever we happened to be. And you'd notice a truck would come up, and 3 or 4 armed guards would jump on it and take off for the docks when a ship would come in. And pretty soon they'd come back to Slim's with boxes and boxes of medical supplies.
Medical supplies, yeah.
We were the only squadron in the Pacific that had an ice machine and all the whiskey you could drink. And do you know we were paying $1.15 a fifth?
Oh my God.
Completely tax-free. For this was Seeger's VO.
The best.
The greatest coup of the war. We could get anything done or get anything transferred to our squadron. We could get people shot, I think. But a good use of this. We were sitting around one night, for example, a guy says, I'm hungry. Well, I'm hungry. Another guy says, oh, okay, come on. Takes a couple of bottles of Seeger's VO, heading for the Seabees. The Seabees could steal anything or make anything. They were amazing. But they had some cooks over there. Took a couple of bottles over there, and the guy made the first pizzas that I'd ever seen. Didn't have anything in it but tomato sauce. He made the crust and had some stewed tomatoes in a can or something, and he used that. That's all it was, but it was
No cheese.
so, no cheese, but it was marvelous.
You have trouble with cheese.
Boy. So, that stuff was, I'm not kidding you, gold. because when I did come home from that tour, my orders read, return via surface vessel, which meant any ship that you could get that would take you to Hawaii, and then Hawaii to the States. That would have been, I mean, we're talking 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And I said, nuts to that. That's for the birds. I had these 2 green canvas bags, and in it, the only thing I had my toothbrush, tube of toothpaste, razor, and 21/5 of Seeger's VO. And I went over to the Navy, and I got one of the, almost like a PT boat, some guys that we had gotten to know, and they took me to an Army island where the ATC, the Army Transport Command, landed. And I went into there, and I went up to the operations shack, and I said, can you get me a flight to Hawaii? No, sir. He said, they're just cracking down on us. You got to have priorities now. He said, all the big shots, you're 1-star, 2-star colonels, all that. He says, they can get them, but he says, I can't do anything for you, especially a Marine. So I said, well, reached in the bag and I pulled out a 5th. Said, what's that? He said, that is an A1 priority. A1.
It only took 1 bottle?
1 bottle.
You had 20 to go?
I had 20 to go. I used another. I broke most of them. Well, I had another one we drank right away in Hawaii. And I had 19 when we landed on the West Coast, and that's when whiskey was so hard for the poor old people to get, who civilians. I felt sorry for them. So anyway, that got me home that time. Well, that tour was a very difficult one because, as I said, we'd already lost Jim Iskey that I mentioned to you. He was flying a Catalina, one of these scout observation amphibious, and he always carried with him the silver dollar that was his good luck charm, and it worked well. And it's the coin we used to give to the officials at home football games and let them flip. And I don't think we ever lost a game using that coin. Anyway, he wandered down, this was at Guadalcanal, he wandered down to the flight shack one day, and he wasn't scheduled to fly. And the plane that was going to take off for a scouting mission was ready to go, and their co-pilot became ill. And Iskey was standing right there. He said, I'll take it. I'll take it. And he didn't, all his stuff was back in his shack. He didn't have his billfold with silver dollar or anything like that. So he took the flight, and they were all killed. And I had to take care of his effects, which was one of the toughest jobs I've ever had. And in there was a silver dollar that had brought him through everything else, according to him, but he didn't have it at the right time. And when I got back to the States, I took that to, right, Hamilton, Ohio, where his family was, and I'd known his sister real well. She also went to DePauw, and I went back there to take the silver dollar back to them. Thought they might value it, and they all got together and they said they would prefer I kept it.
And you keep that in your wallet to this day?
Yep. Yep. Sure do. I don't know if it's been good luck or not. Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So, I don't know. That's pretty much the story. That second tour, we flew and we flew and we flew. There must have been, when we ended up, we went through Tarawa, Macon, on up through the Central Pacific.